Howdy Doomtown fans, Willingdon here, and I'm back to talk about Frontier Justice. This is the 4th saddlebag for Doomtown Reloaded, or the 5th overall expansion release. We're going to start by looking at the dudes, and the first one that we have is Funtime Freddy. This is a 3 of spades. He's 3 to play with no upkeep. He's 1 stud and no influence. He's an abomination, has Huckster 0, and he's a grifter, which you can only have 1 of those in your starting posse. He has React Boot. At the start of the game, Ace Freddy. Search your deck for 2 different hexes and reveal them. The player on your left chooses one to ace, attach the other to one of your hucksters paying the cost. Discard a card. This guy's kind of a question mark for me. On one hand, he has really good stats. I like that he has the stud bullet for a cheap cost and no upkeep. He's also an abomination, which interacts well with the oddities of nature. He's a huckster, which is going to be nice as maybe a backup huckster for most of the 4th ring decks. The grifter thing is really the part that I'm not so sure about. It seems like there really isn't a lot of great stuff to do with that. I mean, I'm thinking I would just get some standard spells, some like Paralysis Mark or Blood Curse or Corporeal Twist or something like that. I don't really see you being able to do anything like especially combo-y with this effect. And I don't know if it's going to be worth it to ace this guy out of your posse just to get that spell attached to your guy. If you're already playing a lot of spells in your deck, you're also going to have to discard a card. So I think the real value of this guy is that he has pretty good stats, and occasionally you can use his grifter ability depending on what you're playing against and depending on what you drew in your hand. So I see this guy being pretty decent. In the future, I could see maybe spells that have some effect when they're aced or something like that. I don't know, maybe some spells could come out in the future that would let you more consistently use the grifter ability with this. But I think for now, you're just going to play this as a starting guy with decent stats. The next dudes are the Flying Poesis. This is an 8 of spades, 4 to play, 0 upkeep, 1 draw, 1 influence, and it's a 4th ring dude. Huckster 0. While they have 2 or more hexes attached, they get +1 influence. Shootout, if they have a mystical good attached, they become a stud. Well, the first thing and the most important thing I'd say about this dude is 8 of spades. You don't really have a lot of choice in 4th ring when it comes to what you're going to play as 8 of spades. Right now, it's just the ghostly gun, and that's a really expensive dude that if you're not doing something with abominations, probably isn't worth it. So you're basically going to have to pump your deck full of Stephen Wiles if you want 8 on your draw structure. There's maybe a few out-of-faction dudes, but in general, 4th ring would really like to see some more 8 of spades dudes, since 8 of spades and just 8s fit into so many draw structures. So I think the main thing that this card has going for it is that draw value. I think in general, this is a pretty decent guy. I like the 2 hex thing. I'd like to see more abilities involved with the 2 hex thing, or like they have to have some number of hexes. I really like that idea. The shootout ability with becoming stud could occasionally matter, I suppose, if you're using certain spells that modify your bullets or things like that. I don't know, I think that this card is halfway decent, mainly just because the no upkeep thing, another huckster, this is an 8 of spades, so it fits well into draw structures. There's just a lot of kind of miscellaneous things going for this card. It's got that influence as well. I think this is a pretty decent contender as a guy that you're going to slot 1 or 2 of in your 4th ring deck, just because he's on value and you're going to have another reinforcement huckster, no upkeep and whatnot. This seems like a pretty decent dude. Next up, we have a Law Dogs dude. His name is Andrew Burton. He's an ace of spades. He's 3 to play, no upkeep. He's 2 draw, 0 influence. He's a deputy. He's blessed 0, and he's a grifter as well. React Boot, at the start of the game, discard a card, draw a card, and add 1 bounty to another player's dude. I really like this guy. I'm a big Law Dogs fan, and I think this dude is pretty easily going to fit into a lot of different Law Dogs builds. The fact that he's blessed is going to give us a lot more wiggle room to try out some of this Law Dogs Miracles stuff. And he's also a deputy, so he's going to count for the various deputy effects like Prescott Utter. The actual grifter ability that he has is pretty good. It's not blowing my socks off, but it's pretty good. The add 1 bounty to another player's dude, that's really nice. It saves you from having to use the Law Dog's outfit power. And if you're using the arsenal instead of the regular Law Dog's outfit, like you might be in a more spell-oriented deck, you're going to still be able to get the bounty on the guy and potentially still be able to use something like Bounty Hunter. This guy seems like a serious contender for replacing either Philip or maybe Travis in a starting posse for a Law Dogs deck. I think there's quite a few Law Dogs decks that are playing one or both of those guys, and I think that this guy could pretty easily replace one of your lower end dudes just because he's still a deputy. If you need the bless, that helps, and the grifter thing that he has is overall pretty good. Next up, we have another Law Dog dude. This is Elmore Ry. He's a 5 of spades, 6 to play with 2 upkeep. He's 1 draw, 3 influence. He has Noon Boot. Choose another player's dude at a deed they do not own. Gain Ghost Rock equal to their bounty. I think this guy has some pretty good synergy with the original Law Dogs outfit. You could potentially target one dude over and over and over, and you could even potentially use this guy as a 3 influence target if you played him down to do that. I think more realistically, you're going to be building up bounties on a guy through the early part of the game, and then you're going to play this guy down, and he's suddenly going to have the ability to make quite a bit of Ghost Rock rather than just like 1 or 2. If you don't have some way to give them several bounties, I don't see this Noon Boot ability really being that good. But the fact that it's just a 3 influence dude for Law Dogs could have some potential. I think also the 5 of spades is not bad either. It fits into some draw structures fairly well. So I like this card. I think it's going to give us some options that we didn't have before. This seems like a very different type of Law Dog thing. It's a little more economic. It's got the big influence. This kind of seems like a Morgan Cattle Company guy that they just kind of put into Law Dogs and switched the word like upkeep to bounty or something like that. It's a pretty interesting guy. I think that this has some playability, and I'll probably be trying this guy out in the original outfit Law Dogs. Next up, we have a Morgan Cattle Company dude. This is Howard Aswell. He's a 4 of spades, 3 to play, 0 upkeep. He's 2 draw, 0 influence. He's got Mad Scientist 0, and he is also a grifter. So many grifters in this pack. I love it. React. At the start of the game, if there are no deeds in your hand, reveal it and discard the top 10 cards of your deck. You may discard a card from your hand to put a ranch or improvement from your discard pile into your hand. I think this is probably the new grifter that I'm the most interested in, his react ability, but I think this guy has kind of the weakest stats of all of them. The bullets don't really matter that much in most Morgan decks. I think if you're building a kind of gadget-oriented Morgan deck, which is what the Mad Scientist encourages you to do, you could maybe make his bullets count fairly easily. No upkeep is going to be awesome, like I've said about so many dudes in this pack so far. And I think that this react ability is a lot easier to use and easier to pull off than some of the other ones. You're going to play a lot of ranches. The ranches are really good in basically all Morgan decks. So I think you're probably going to have the full array of those available in the game. The improvements, I was curious about that. I couldn't think of any cards that were improvements off the top of my head. Really, we're just looking at auto cattle feeder and the teleportation device as well. I think it's probably going to be auto cattle feeder most of the time. I don't know. I think this is pretty cool. If we got some more ranches, I think that this could be really good. But for now, I think it's more cool than good. Having a mad scientist with a couple bullets that's cheap with no upkeep, I could see that being halfway decent. So I think this guy has some limited playability, but I think once we get some more ranches in the game, this guy could really, really spike in power level. The next dude is also Morgan Cattle Company. This is Louie Pastur. He is a Queen of Spades, 8 to play with 2 upkeep. He is a 0 stud with 2 influence. Mad Scientist 2. He has Repeat Noon, pay 1 Ghost Rock, make a Mad Scientist skill test against a difficulty of 10. If successful, unboot one of your dudes at this or an adjacent location. This guy seems like he could be a pretty monstrous finisher for a Mad Scientist-oriented Morgan deck. The fact that it says repeat, I think, is really what's blowing my mind. You can use this ability throughout your turn and potentially unboot several dudes. I think being able to make that pull is going to be trivial in most of the Mad Scientist decks, or it's certainly not going to be difficult. This guy's kind of expensive, but he's a high pull. I think queens are going to be on value for a fair number of the Mad Scientist decks. And I think all around this guy is going to be really solid and is going to see play as like a 1 or maybe 2 of in a variety of Morgan decks based on Mad Scientist. Next up, we have a Sloan Gang dude. This is Benny McGill. He's a 2 of spades, 3 to play with 0 upkeep. He's 1 draw, 0 influence. Huckster 1, and he has Noon, boot a Hex on Benny to call out a dude with higher bullet rating at this location who cannot refuse. Like with so many guys in this pack, I feel like this guy just has pretty decent stats and is maybe going to be playable just for that reason. No upkeep, I've said this many times, is really good. Huckster 1 is going to be useful in the Sloan Hex-oriented decks. So I think that this guy has a pretty good chance of slotting into those decks, at least as a guy that you would draw into. I think he's pretty good as a contender for a starting dude, especially since his low pull value is going to make him somewhat a liability in your deck, although generally the Sloan decks don't have to pull that high anyway on their spells. Now, his Noon ability, I think, is really the most interesting part, and I'm sort of torn on it. On one hand, it addresses something that I think Sloan Gang really needs addressing, which is the ability to call out dudes at your opponent's home. Usually the way that we punish that in a Sloan Gang deck is by playing lots of jobs, whether it be like kidnapping or things that mark the town square that our opponent isn't going to be able to easily oppose unless they want to end up in the town square booted. This is going to be a much more direct way of handling that. You're going to be able to just walk up to their home, have Benny and maybe your whole team there, and then call out one of their dudes. Now, there's a massive limitation on this, which is that the dude that you're calling out has to have higher bullets. That's going to be a huge limiting factor. A lot of the dudes that you want to call out are pretty squishy. They don't have a lot of bullets. And even just his 1 bullet is going to either tie or exceed a lot of the primary targets for the calling out at home. But still having that effect in your deck, especially in a deck that contains some spells and you can do some tricky stuff with them, seems pretty good to me. I think this guy's pretty easily going to see play if you have a way to use his Huckster 1 ability. And I've been kind of a fan of the Sloan spell-oriented stuff. I don't think it's quite all the way there, but I do think that it's got a lot of potential, and here's another good card for that strategy. The next dude that we have is also Sloan Gang, and this is Marian Sevil. He's a 7 of spades this time, 6 to play, 1 upkeep. He's got 3 draw and 2 influence. He's experience 1. Shootout, if Marian has a melee weapon attached, he becomes a stud, and you may boot a weapon in the opposing posse. Well, I think Marian has been a staple in a lot of Sloan Gang decks. He's a nice dude with some influence, pretty inexpensive. This experience version seems pretty decent. I really like the 7, since that's going to match Kidnapping and some of the other things that you might want to play. That shootout ability is really cool. It's really interesting. I like the ability to neutralize weapons. That seems very Sloan Gang to me. Now, it does have the massive limitation of it has to be a melee weapon. The problem with that is there's currently one of those in the whole game, which is that big sword, Evanor, we looked at in the previous expansion. So I think for now, that's probably going to be something that you're not really going to want to do. But I do think that you're probably going to be waiting around with this until there's some more melee weapons in the game. I would anticipate that we're going to see some knives or some kind of other melee weapons that are going to fit this guy a lot better than that giant expensive sword did. So this is an interesting card. I think it's maybe not all the way there yet. I think it could see some limited playability just because we already play Marian Sevil in our deck. It's going to be on value in a lot of decks. But I think for the most part, this guy's probably going to sit in the box until we see some more melee weapons so that we can really capitalize on that awesome shootout ability. The last dude in the pack is J.W. Burn. This is a neutral dude. He's a queen of spades, 3 to play with 1 upkeep. He has 1 stud and 0 influence. While he has a weapon attached, he gets +1 bullets. While he has a tire attached, he gets +1 influence. And while he has a horse attached, he gets -1 upkeep. This guy seems okay to me. I think that he's kind of interesting. I really like the different conditionals based on what's attached to him. But at the same time, that 1 upkeep I think is a really big limiter for this dude. It seems to me like the main reason you'd be thinking about playing this guy is that you want queens as part of your draw structure, and you also happen to have either weapons or horses or maybe a tire to attach to him. I think, like I said, that 1 upkeep is really the biggest limiter for him. You're really not going to want to start this guy. He's not going to be worth that upkeep. And if you play him down later in the game, it's probably going to be a lot more affordable, but you're still not going to be getting that great of a value with the no influence. You're going to have to get a tire on him to get influence. That seems difficult to do. Queens, I think, are increasingly a realistic draw value for quite a few decks. I've seen a few different builds of Morgan gadgets that play queen as part of their draw structure. We just saw a really awesome queen earlier in the pack with Louie. And I think that and we also always have had Max Bane at queen as well for Morgan. So I think that it's getting a lot more realistic to use queens as part of your draw structure. This guy would be nice as a flesh out of that. And he's going to have some relevant abilities that aren't exactly mind-blowing, but they're pretty good. So I don't know. I like this guy. I like the idea of having more generic guys that help fill in draw structures. This guy's got some interesting things going on, but I don't think he's especially good. Well, that's going to do it for the dudes in this pack. I will say quickly that I really, really like this influx of grifters, and I really like this influx of no-influence guys. I think this is an area of the game that's needed to be fleshed out a little bit more, and we're starting to get some of that in this pack. So I really like that. I think that there's a lot of new good options for a variety of decks because no influence guys are just so solid, and some of the grifter abilities are going to give us some interesting strategic options. So good pack so far. Make sure you tune into part 2 of the review. We're going to talk about all of the rest of the cards that aren't dudes.